and welcome back to Coach Craig Sports. Today we're going to be talking about some MLB Trade Deadline Deals. So I got it up here on MLB Trade Rumors. If you guys aren't familiar with the site, be sure to check it out. They actually broke it down team by team, who all was picked up, who all was traded, and stuff like that. A lot of these were trades that happened earlier in the month as well. Some of them I won't go over too much, but I'll just give you guys a little bit on each trade, my thoughts on them, who I think won the trade if there was a clear winner in the trade, and how I liked it for both teams. So we'll go here to Toronto Blue Jays. So this was the one that happened a while ago. Dan Vogelbach was acquired from the Mariners for cash considerations. I believe Vogelbach was waived, so pretty much this was just giving him some money for Vogelbach. He's a decent buy low guy. He was a pretty decent prospect back in the day. He's never really panned out. And then they got Taijuan Walker from the Mariners as well for a player to be named later. So this is a good buy low. Walker been pitching decent this year, and Toronto needed a little bit more starting pitching depth. So he's not owed too much money. I believe he's just going to be a free agent after the season. So I think it's a deal that worked out for both sides. The Mariners pick up a prospect. They've been rebuilding for what seems like forever now. And then Toronto gets another starting pitcher to help them try to compete this season. Do the same thing down here below with Robbie Ray from the Diamondbacks and Bergeron. So the Diamondbacks pretty much just gained some salary cap flexibility in this. Robbie Ray hadn't been pitching too good this year. His walks have always been high, but even this year it's like he's walking the batter per inning. They said it was due to like his change in mechanics, so he's trying to switch back to how he used to throw. So if he can regain some of what he used to be, it could be a good trade for the Blue Jays. Otherwise, it's just a decent like buy low. And then the pitcher they traded away was a left-handed pitcher, Travis Bergen. I think I'm saying his name right. He's kind of been like a prospect, like he's just a middle reliever guy. They said he's thrown a little bit harder again this year. He's kind of had a couple walk problems of his own. He was actually a Rule 5 draft pick that got picked up by San Francisco last year, I believe it was, but then he ended up being returned to the Blue Jays. It's a pretty solid deal for both sides. It's just a real buy low deal for each side. And then Jonathan VR from the Marlins for a player to be named later, which was reportedly Griffin Conine. This was a real interesting trade, mainly because the Marlins picked up Starlin Marte that we'll talk about a little bit later. So that kind of made VR expendable. If I remember correctly, I think VR is eligible for one more year of arbitration, so Toronto could use him next year. I think the Marlins might have just non-tendered him just because they're kind of cheap. So in return, they're getting Griffin Conine, who's a pretty decent prospect. If the last name's familiar, his dad did play in the majors for quite some time. Jeff Conine, he was a first baseman / outfielder. His son's kind of the same way, first baseman / outfielder. Big power hitter. He has a lot of strikeouts, though. He could be somebody to watch out for in the future for the Marlins. And then the Blue Jays also acquired Ross Stripling. This was kind of like at the deadline or like right after the deadline. It came in pretty late. They got Ross Stripling for two players to be named later. I think it's a good buy low for the Blue Jays. You can see a theme here that they're trying to acquire more starting pitching depth just because they don't really have that depth and they're trying to compete. For the Dodgers, getting a couple prospects back and replenishing their minor league system, it seems to be something that they do very well. And Stripling became expendable because you had guys like Dustin May and Tony Gonsolin pitching well this year, so they didn't really need Stripling in the rotation as much. Then we'll go to Tampa Bay. So Tampa Bay got Edgar Garcia from Phillies for a player to be named later. I think that happened a while ago. We're just going to click on it real quick to see. So that happened back on the 18th. And Garcia wasn't really doing much, so that's not really a major move. Then they got rid of Daniel Robertson to the Giants for cash consideration. That was another one where he was just kind of waived and somebody else put in a claim for him and they got some cash back for him, so nothing too much to say there. This was one that happened the other day that was really weird. It was Brett Phillips from the Royals for Lucius Fox. And Fox was a pretty highly rated prospect at one time. I'm going to click on his numbers just to see if he kind of tailed off or something. Because Brett Phillips, he was once upon a time a good prospect too, but more now, lately he's pretty much just been a defensive outfielder who really hasn't hit in the majors. Yeah, so it looks like Fox has kind of struggled to hit, at least last year. But there's still some upside there, so that's a decent buy low for the Royals. And then for the Rays getting Brett Phillips, it's just kind of like a defensive outfielder, but I don't think overall it helps their team that much. Then they got Cody Reed from the Reds, who's a left-handed pitcher. He was kind of a starter slash a reliever. And it kind of makes sense for the Rays, the way they like to build their team and use guys in multiple innings. Maybe they can get a little bit more out of him than the Reds did. Because at one point in time, he was a pretty high prospect, but he just never amounted to much. And they gave up Riley O'Brien, who I'm not too familiar with. We'll try to look him up real quick. It says he was an 8th round draft pick in 2017 amateur. And let's see, he pitched in high A ball and double A last year. Decent strikeout numbers, not too bad walk numbers, not too bad overall. So he might be somebody to watch out for in the future. It's kind of one of them trades that probably work out for both sides or not work out at all for either side. They got 2 players to be named later for Jose Martinez from the Cubs. Jose Martinez was somebody they picked up last offseason from the Cardinals. He hadn't been doing too much from the Rays. He kind of became an expendable bat. So I say getting something in return for him, even if it's just kind of 2 players to be named later, could be considered pretty good. Then they acquired cash considerations for Anthony Banda. He was waived. Banda at one point in time was thought to be a pretty good prospect. He had Tommy John surgery, I believe, and he's never quite been the same ever since. The Yankees didn't do much, especially around the trade deadline. This one happened a while ago that they traded David Hale to the Phillies for Addison Russ. And I'm not too sure about Russ here. 19th round draft pick in 2017 draft. His minor league numbers are like okay at best. Looks like he's just going to be a reliever. So if they didn't really need David Hale, getting a prospect in return for him could be all right. And for the Phillies, they need bullpen help, so Hale just kind of helps out with that. They also picked up Rob Brantley from the Giants for cash considerations. I believe that was like kind of another waiver trade or just picking up some depth catching. I know the backup catcher for the Yankees did get hurt at one point as well. Then the Boston Red Sox, they traded Heath Hembree and Brandon Workman to Philadelphia for Nick Pivetta and Connor Siebold. I don't think Siebold's all that great. I just got to look at him real quick. So he'd been pitching pretty decent this year. This trade kind of works out well for both sides. Maybe the Red Sox can get something out of Siebold and Pivetta. They're more like starting pitchers, and the Red Sox really need starting pitching right now. And then the 2 guys they traded away were relief pitchers, and that's really what the Phillies needed was more relief pitchers. Then the next trade was one that I really liked personally for the Red Sox. They traded away Mitch Moreland, who's I believe on the last year of his deal, and they got Hudson Potts and Jennison Rosario. They were 2 pretty good prospects for the Padres. They were a little bit further down in the Padres system just because the Padres system was so good. But Hudson Potts was a former first-round pick. He's a guy I like quite a bit, and then Rosario has a little bit of upside as well. Red Sox won that trade. Then they also acquired a player to be named later for Josh Osich, a left-handed relief pitcher. Osich has just kind of bounced around the majors for a long time. He's nothing great, so getting anything in return for him, I consider that a win. And then they acquired a player to be named later in international bonus space for Kevin Pillar. I can't remember if they said who the player to be named later was yet. But Pillar pretty much signed a 1-year deal with them. He was kind of a 4th outfielder. So being able to flip him for a minor league player and some international bonus pool money is a win to me as well. I think the Orioles did pretty good on the trade deadline. Obviously, they weren't competitive this year. But they were able to trade Tommy Milone away, who isn't like that great anyways, to the Braves for 2 minor league for 2 players to be named later. So flipping him for that is a win in my book. Then they were able to flip Michael Givens, who is a relief pitcher, to the Rockies, who needed like a back of the end, who needed a lot of bullpen help, especially at the back end. For Tyler Nevin, son of Phil Nevin, he's a pretty decent prospect himself. He actually had Tommy John surgery, which is kind of rare for a hitter. And then they got Taran Varva. I know there's been a little bit of talk about him in the past, and a player to be named later. So getting 2 decent prospects and a player to be named later for a relief pitcher, I consider that a win. I believe Givens, he might have one more year of arbitration left, so the Rockies could keep him for next year. If it helps the Rockies win, if he becomes their closer, maybe it's worth it, but I feel like the Rockies did give up a lot in this trade. Then the last one they did, they traded Miguel Castro away, who is a relief pitcher. He's never been really good, but he's made a little bit of progress. He's gotten better like last year and this year, but he's nothing special. They traded him away to the Mets, and I think in this deal, personally the Mets gave up too much. They gave up left-handed pitching prospect Kevin Smith, who is somebody that I'm pretty high on. According to MLB.com, he was their number 12 prospect. And then they gave up him and a player to be named later. I think Kevin Smith has a good chance of sticking in the rotation, and he could pitch as soon as this year probably for the Orioles if they want to test him out in their rotation, see what they got for the future. Otherwise, he's a guy to watch out for next year. Smith was actually their minor league pitcher of the year last year for the Mets, and like I said, he's just got decent upside. Then we'll go over to the AL Central. So the Twins, the only move they made, which was before the deadline here, is they picked up Ildemaro Vargas from the Diamondbacks for cash considerations. Switch hitting, utility infielder essentially. He's not anything great, and they just gave up cash for him, so you can call that kind of a win-win. The Royals, we already talked about them trading away Brett Phillips for Fox, so we don't need to go into that anymore. And then they traded away Trevor Rosenthal, who had a big bounce-back year as a closer to the Padres, and they got Edward Olivares and a player to be named later. Olivares is not like a great prospect, I would say. He's got pretty decent speed. If he learns how to hit, maybe he could be a decent outfielder in the major leagues. Otherwise, he's kind of just like a fourth outfielder type guy. And then depending on who they get and the player to be named later, I think it was a good move for the Padres. They didn't really give up too much for Rosenthal, who kind of found his footing again this year. And then I think it was decent for Kansas City as well, because they're getting two prospects for a guy they really just bought low on. Anyways, the Tigers only made one move. They traded away Cameron Maybin to the Cubs. Cameron Maybin's, he's old as crap now, but he's still like a decent defensive outfielder. I think he kind of still hits left-handed pitching all right. I guess the Cubs just want another right-handed bat and defensive replacement in the outfielder coming later in the game for Schwarber. And they gave up Zach Short, who is an infielder. I think he's going to end up being a utility infielder in the major leagues. I consider this more of a win for Detroit because Maybin's not much of anything. He's just like a last guy in your bench depth piece. And to potentially get a utility infielder for him is pretty good. I'm going to bring up Short's stats real quick here. So he's 25 years old now. Yeah, at one point Short was thought of pretty decently, but he's kind of fallen off, it seems like. Last year he only played in, 63 games, so it looks like he had a little bit of injury problems. His batting average kind of suffered, but the year before that he had 17 home runs, so you're just talking about like a utility infielder with a little bit of pop. He could be all right. And then the Indians, they traded away cash considerations for James Hoyt, who was with the Marlins. The Marlins picked him up as just kind of one of them filler guys after they came back from the whole COVID thing where half their team was missing. So for the Marlins, that was probably a win, or they got their money back from what they originally traded for him. Just a depth piece in the bullpen for the Indians. He's probably not somebody that's going to stick around for too long. Then you had the big trade where the Indians traded away Mike Clevenger and Greg Allen. So Clevenger is obviously like a top of the rotation starter. Greg Allen's kind of just a depth outfielder. So they did give up a good starter and then like an outfielder. And then in return, they got Josh Naylor, who was a pretty good prospect at one point. He's been playing the outfield, but he was originally a first baseman. If the Indians can give him full-time at-bats, I feel like he could be a decent player. And then they got Cal Quantrill, right-handed pitcher who's been mainly pitching out of the bullpen this year. Last year he was used as a starter. He's somebody I think the Indians could kind of groom, and he could prosper with them. Then they got catcher Austin Hedges. I believe Roberto Perez is still out, so maybe that's why they picked him up. Hedges has been more known as a defensive catcher with some pop. Not really a great bat otherwise, though. Gabriel Arias is another guy here that he's a shortstop in the minor leagues. High A ball last year. I think he was 19 years old when he was playing. And he had a ton of home runs for his age. And then they got Joey Cantanillo and Owen Miller as well. So they got three decent prospects and then three guys that have been in the majors for this. I consider this pretty even trade, honestly. The Indians could have some good value if some of these guys prosper out, and then the Padres got a top of the rotation starter that they were looking for in Clevenger, as well as a depth outfield piece in Greg Allen, especially somebody that can pinch run, be a defensive replacement at least late in games. And then the White Sox were very inactive at the trade deadline. The cash considerations for Luis Basbe, just a waiver claim by the Giants. And then they picked up Jared Dyson for international bonus pool money. This was an underrated move, but it was one that I liked. I'm a White Sox fan. I think most of you guys probably already know that. Dyson, he's a good speed guy, good defensive replacement. He hasn't been hitting at all this year. For me, it's a move I like. They already had Adam Engel, who's kind of a similar player, but when you start the game out with Eloy Jimenez and Nomar Mazara, they're both not great defensive outfielders. If you're up big or if you're up late in a game, you can bring in Dyson and Engel, and then you have Dyson, Engel, and Luis Robert in the outfield, and you go from like an average at best outfield defensively to a very good defensive outfield. So I like that move a lot, just going forward. Plus, like I said, you can pinch run him late in games because he's a fast guy. Texas Rangers acquired a player to be named later in cash considerations for Ariel here. That one happened a while ago. Not going to say too much about that. Then they acquired Marcus Smith and Dustin Harris in international money for Mike Minor. Minor is probably somebody they should have traded in the offseason. If they knew he was going to do this bad this year, they probably would have tried to sell higher on him earlier on in the season. But getting 2 prospects and some international money for him, who probably wasn't going to be back on their team anyways next year, and even as bad of a season that he did have, I consider that a win. And then they got a player to be named later for both Robinson Chirinos and Todd Frazier from the Mets. Frazier, like this is just selling high on. They're pretty much rental pieces, so getting 2 players to be named later, I consider that a win. For the Mets, I don't really love the move for the Mets because I don't really think Todd Frazier helps them out that much. Chirinos kind of helps with their catching. Him and Wilson Ramos could make a little good pairing there. Mariners, they're always busy, so this was before. So the top 2 were before the trade deadline. They're mainly just waiver claims. And then we already talked about trading Taijuan Walker away. One of the bigger moves that they did, it was another Padres trade. The Padres were real active on the trade deadline scene. So the Mariners acquired Taylor Trammell, Ty France, Luis Torrens, and Andres Munoz for catcher Austin Nola, Austin Adams, who's been on the IL pretty much all year, and Dan Altavilla. This was a trade I liked a lot for Seattle. The Padres gave up a lot for Taylor Trammell last year, and they sold on him. He's still a pretty good prospect. And then Ty France is a guy that I like a lot. He's got a lot of power. He hits left-handed pitching very well. He's able to play first, second, and third base. Luis Torrens, he's kind of been around for a while. He's kind of a developmental catcher. Not too bad defensively. Never quite hit too much, though. Maybe Seattle can work something out with him and turn him into at least a decent catcher. Otherwise, he'll probably just end up being the backup behind Tom Murphy once he is fully healthy. Andres Munoz is kind of the wild card in this one. He's a relief pitcher. He had Tommy John surgery, so we're not going to see what he's able to do till at least next year. But before that, he had pretty good stuff. Then Austin Nola, I like picking up here. He's been a pretty good hitter, okay defensively catcher. He should have a couple years of arbitration left as well. Austin Adams, like I said, he's been hurt all year, so that's a big risk. And then Altavilla, he hasn't been pitching too well this year either. But the Padres were just going after more depth in their bullpen. Like I said, I think it was a good deal for the Mariners. The Padres probably gave up a little bit too much. Then the A's, this Mark Patton one was pretty much just a waiver claim. But they traded away Franklin Barreto for Tommy La Stella. This was a move I liked a lot. La Stella, since he's been with the Angels, has been a pretty good hitter. And Barreto really hasn't done much. They have a big hole at second base. And La Stella's going to fill that in pretty nicely. I don't know if they'll platoon him and Tony Kemp at all, but I think La Stella is definitely a major upgrade over Barreto. The Angels are taking a chance on Franklin Barreto and hoping he gets some upside. It'd be interesting to see maybe they move him back to shortstop if Adrian Simonton walks after the season. We already talked about the Mike Minor trade. It's probably a win-win for both teams, especially if Minor starts pitching better. Then we go to the Angels. We already talked about the La Stella trade here. And then they got Gerardo Reyes for Jason Castro. Reyes has pitched a little bit in the majors, hasn't had too much success. He's just buying low on him. Castro is a guy, I think he only had a 1-year deal anyways. He's just another catcher. Like they're probably gonna bring somebody else in after the season, just like they did with Castro this year, just like they did with the year before as well. And then they traded Brian Goodwin away, who is a waiver claim of theirs like a year ago, for Packy Nottington and a player to be named later. And Packy was he's a decent prospect for the Reds. I'll bring up his stats real quick. ninth round pick in 2017 draft. He pitched all the way up to Double-A last year. He's been decent in the minors overall, but just getting him for Goodwin, who wasn't going to be a factor in the long-term plans probably anyways, like just being able to flip him for 2 minor leaguers, it's a pretty good deal in my mind. So this one up here with the Astros, I think that was just a waiver claim pretty much too. Brooks Raley for a player to be named later from the Reds, just a bullpen depth move. Nationals didn't make any moves here. Then we get to the Phillies. We already talked about that one. We already talked about David Hale. We already talked about Heath Hembry and Workman. They traded Austin Davis, I believe was waived anyways, to the Pirates for a player to be named later, cash considerations. Not too much to say there. Then the last one was they picked up David Phelps from the Brewers. I like Phelps a lot. I think he's a good bullpen piece, no matter whose team he's on. He's a guy you can use for 1 inning. He's good against lefties and righties. They gave up 3 players to be named later, essentially, and they're all listed right here. All these guys are just real young, like international guys. Most of them have played a year or 2 in the low minors, like rookie ball. So it's really hard to tell if they will turn out into anything. I think for the Phillies, it's a pretty good move. For the Brewers, it's not a bad move at all either, because Phelps was pretty much just there on a 1-year deal, and being able to flip him into 3 wild card or 3 lottery ticket prospects, essentially, not bad at all. The Mets, I feel like we talked about most of theirs already. The Bachelor here was just a waiver claim one. So they got Billy Hamilton. That was actually a while ago that they traded Jordan Humphreys away for. I kind of liked Humphreys, so I think that was kind of in favor of the Giants there. We already talked about this trade. We talked about the Castro trade. I think they gave up too much with Smith and another player for Castro. And then we talked about these 2, which aren't like awful trades, but like I said, I don't know how much Frazier actually helps them in the long run. Then we got the Miami Marlins. We already talked about the Hoyt trade there. This Rockies one where they gave away Chad Smith for Jesus, I don't know I can't really say much about that. Smith wasn't great. This Jesus guy, if I remember correctly, he was a starter mainly in the minor leagues, but he's probably going to be a bullpen arm. It's more like a future play than anything. We already talked about Jonathan VR trade, which I like, and that kind of goes next into that Starling Marte trade where they trade Caleb Smith, Humberto Mejia, and a player to be named later who is reportedly Julio Frijas. So the Marlins are kind of trying to compete now, so that's why they trade for Marte. Marte also has a team option after this year for a reasonable amount of money. Otherwise, they can buy it out, obviously. So he's a low-cost investment, and then if it helps him get to the playoffs, helps him get to the playoffs. If not, they could always pick up his option and then try to trade him away, flip him for somebody else. Caleb Smith had been out for a while now. Mejia made a couple spot starts for them, but he's probably shouldn't have been up in the majors this year anyways. And Frijas, I don't know too much about. We can look at him. So he's 22 years old. Looks like he's from the Dominican Republic originally. He's only pitched in low A ball apparently, and rookie ball. So he doesn't look that great, honestly. So he's just a wild card prospect. Then we get to the Braves. We already talked about the Tommy Malone trade. And then there was them trading Yadier Alonso to the Padres for cash. And then Alonso hadn't done anything. They already traded for Mitch Moreland anyway, so that's nothing to talk about there. We talked about the Dyson one here. We talked about all the other Pirates ones. Cardinals didn't make any moves. Pirates, I'm surprised they didn't trade away like another player. But like a Keone Kela or somebody like that. And then the Brewers, we already talked about them trading away David Phelps. There was rumors that the Brewers were listening to offers on Josh Hader, but they had to be blown away to trade him. Apparently nobody did that, so that's obviously that. And then we talked about pretty much all these trades for the Reds so far we all talked about besides the last one. Archie Bradley from the Diamondbacks for Josh Van Meter and Stuart Fairchild. I like this deal for the Reds. I really do. The Reds have been underperforming this year. Archie Bradley gives them a closer or a solid back end of the bullpen option. Iglesias hasn't been too great this year. All the other guys they kind of picked up haven't really done too well. Van Meter's not a guy that I see long-term panning out. I don't see him long-term in the Reds' future. Stuart Fairchild is a decent prospect, but he's not anybody like I get super excited about. So I think it's a good move for the Reds. With the Diamondbacks, though, I would like to see him keep Archie Bradley, but I mean, if you like Fairchild, then I guess it's a decent deal. I don't like I said, I don't think Van Meter's going to amount to much, anyways. And they already kind of got somebody like him and Joshua Rojas. Then the Cubs, we already talked about most of their. We actually talked about all the Cubs trades already. The Jose Martinez for 2 players to be named later. It's an okay trade. Then the 2 left-handed. Oh, I guess we didn't talk about the Andrew Chafin trade from the Diamondbacks for a player to be named later. It's kind of like the Osich one. Chafin's been a little bit better than Osich in his career, but he is injured right now. And just depending on who they gave up, it could be better or worse. Like I said, like I was telling some people I know, like the Cubs just traded for like 4 nobodies. Like, not to be like mean to these guys, but they're just very minor role players. It's nothing that's going to push the train one way or another. Then the Giants were all just minor. These were like all minor trades or waiver claims. Not too much more to say there. Like I said, the Padres, they were very active. We went over this one. Let's see. I'll go over any trades that we didn't already go over with them. And then the last one was they got Taylor Williams from the Mariners for a player to be named later, who is reportedly Matt Brash, who I kind of liked last year's draft. He was their 4th round draft pick. But Taylor Williams is another bullpen arm that they could use. He had been the closer recently for the Mariners. So I like that move for both sides. I like them getting Williams, and I like the Mariners getting Brash. So I think the Padres overall, they did pretty well. They might have gave up a couple more prospects or useful players than I thought they should have. But overall, it helps their team, and if they can get to the playoffs and make a run, it's definitely worth it. And then the Dodgers was only the Ross Stripling trade that we already talked about. The Rockies, we already talked about all their trades. I think the Rockies did make a couple decent moves. They strengthened their back end of their bullpen a little bit, and then they added another outfielder, one who can play center field, which has been a problem with that for them. I just don't know if they're going to make the playoffs. So giving up some of what they did, it might have been a little bit too much. Then the Diamondbacks, we already talked about all the Diamondbacks moves, but they pretty much just traded away guys they weren't going to be able to keep outside of Archie Bradley anyways. And they got prospects in return. So I say they did pretty good overall in the trade deadline. But I would like to see them keep Archie Bradley. I think he's more useful long-term than what they got in return for him. But with that being said, that's pretty much all I got for the trade deadline. I thought like a couple other teams would be more active in the trade market, like the Dodgers, the White Sox. But overall, it was a pretty active deadline. Obviously, you're going to have 16 teams in the playoffs. And there's more teams active fighting for spots that you're going to have more players getting moved. I would have liked to see like the White Sox pick up Lance Lynn. I'm really surprised he didn't get moved. Another name that I was kind of surprised didn't get moved at all was Alex Cobb. He's actually pitched halfway decent this year. And I believe it's the last year of his deal with the Orioles. But apparently nobody was interested in him or they weren't willing to offer anything. But if I was the Orioles, I think you just want to get rid of him. And even if you're eating some money, you get a decent prospect for him or a halfway decent prospect. Obviously, like a big name that was kind of out there was Francisco Lindor as well. Obviously, the Indians pretty much had to be blown away to trade him. But I don't know going forward if he really is going to stay with the Indians, if they're going to pay him or not. But that's pretty much all I got for this trade deadline video. If you guys have any comments, let me know what you think about my thoughts. If you guys have any thoughts about the trade deadline, let me know who your favorite team is. If your favorite team traded for somebody, let me know your thoughts about who your favorite team traded for, who you would like to see them trade for, who you think is going to make the playoffs. Which team looks the strongest now after the trade deadline? Is it the Padres and Clevenger and all these other bullpen pieces and different guys like that they picked up, Austin Nola, other people like that? Is it still like the Dodgers or somebody like that? I'll be really interested to see what you guys think. If you guys need to get a hold of me, you can reach out to me at CoachCraigSports@gmail.com. Check out the Coach Craig Sports page on Facebook. You can follow me on Twitter at CoachCraigSport. And if you guys liked and enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up. Like I said, it was a pretty interesting trade deadline overall. A lot of little moves, a couple big ones here and there as well. And I think it'll be real interesting to see how baseball plays out for the rest of the year and as we go into the playoffs as well. If you guys haven't already subscribed to the channel, down below there's a little subscribe button, not too hard to click. And if you are a new or current subscriber who hasn't already done so, hit that notification bell. It will let you know every single time that I post up a video. If you guys are new to my channel, I make videos about both football and baseball. I've been putting out a lot of fantasy football content lately. I do go over my fantasy baseball leagues as well. Yesterday I put a video about Leonard Fournette, so I put out things about football news as well. I put out a little bit of baseball news. Over the next year, I'm going to be doing baseball a little bit more as well as the football side. I would appreciate it if you guys join me in this community that I'm trying to build here at Coach Craig Sports. But with that being said, that's pretty much all we got for this video. Hope you guys all enjoyed it, and have a great rest of your day.